This is my true story. I spent my entire life building a future for my son, working long hours, missing meals, and giving him everything I never had. I thought love would bring us close when I grew old, but instead, he looked me in the eye one evening and said the words that ended everything: "Stay out of my life." He said it like I was a stranger, like I had never carried him in my arms or wiped his tears. My heart broke, but I didn't cry. I made one call, and you won't believe what happened next. Before that, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And please subscribe so my story can reach more people. It happened during dinner. The television was on, the food was warm, but his voice cut colder than winter air. "Stay out of my life," he said. No anger, no hesitation, just words spoken with finality. The kind of words that don't leave room for love or explanation. I froze. My fork dropped against the plate, but he didn't notice. He just kept scrolling on his phone like nothing had happened. I looked at him, the same boy I once carried on my shoulders. Now a man who saw me as a nuisance, not a father. He didn't look back when he said it. That hurt the most. He didn't even care to see how those words landed. My chest felt heavy, but my face stayed still. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. I wanted to believe it was a joke, a bad mood, maybe just frustration. But deep down, I knew he meant it. There was relief in his voice, like he had finally gotten rid of something that bothered him for years. And that something was me. The table between us suddenly felt like a wall. I remembered every meal we had shared there when he was a child, his laughter, his stories, his messy hands grabbing food from my plate. Now there was nothing. Just silence and a heart that didn't belong to me anymore. I forced myself to finish the meal because pride was the only thing I had left. When I stood to leave, he didn't even look up. I had become invisible in my own home. That night, I sat alone in my room, the words replaying over and over. "Stay out of my life." I thought about all the years I had spent making sure he had one, the school fees, the food, the roof, the nights I worked double shifts. Every sacrifice I made was sitting across from me at that table, and it just told me to disappear. It's strange how quickly love can turn into regret. I used to pray he would become a better man than me. Now I just prayed he would feel something again. He had grown cold. Success had changed him. Money made him proud, made him think he built everything himself. He forgot who taught him how to hold a hammer, who paid the first rent when his business failed, who stood beside him when nobody else believed in him. But that's the thing about giving too much. People start thinking they earned it. He thought he didn't need me anymore, but he was wrong. He just didn't realize it yet. I didn't sleep that night. I walked around the house, touching the walls I built with my own hands, remembering the days we painted them together. I wondered if he even remembered those moments. I could still hear his laughter echoing faintly in the hallways, like a ghost haunting the memories I didn't want anymore. Maybe I had made him too comfortable. Maybe love without boundaries becomes blindness. And I had been blind for too long. By morning, I was calm. The pain was still there, but something had changed. I wasn't broken anymore. I was empty. And sometimes emptiness gives you clarity. I realized that I didn't need to argue or prove anything. He wanted me out of his life, fine. But he had forgotten that part of his life was still mine, legally, financially, and morally. I had built the foundation he was standing on, and I could shake it if I wanted to. I didn't want revenge at first. I wanted peace. But peace doesn't come easy when the person you gave everything to spits in your face. So I decided that if he wanted to live without me, then I would show him what that truly meant. I wouldn't shout, I wouldn't fight, I would simply vanish, but not before taking with me the piece of his world that I had helped create, the part he never earned but always claimed as his. That was the night I stopped being a father who begged for love. That was the night I became a man who remembered his worth. And when I looked at his photo on the wall one last time, I whispered, "You'll understand soon enough." When he said those words, my mind didn't stay in the present. It went backward, to the years when his voice was smaller, softer, and filled with trust. I remembered holding his hand as we crossed the road on his first day of school, He was afraid, but I told him I'd always be there. That day, I made a promise, one he would later break without hesitation. I remembered the nights I worked late just to buy him books. I would skip dinner, counting the coins on the table, hoping they'd be enough for the next day's bills. He never saw that part. He only saw the results, the full fridge, the warm bed, the new shoes. Children rarely notice the bleeding hands that build their comfort. When he was a teenager, I gave him everything I could. He wanted a new bike. I found a way. He wanted to go to college in another city. I sold the only piece of land my father left me. I told myself it was worth it. I believed that love would always circle back, that kindness, when given freely, would someday return. But I was wrong. As I sat there that night, the memories turned bitter. Every sacrifice now felt like a mistake. Every proud moment felt fake. I had built him a life so easy that he never learned to value it. I was the stepping stone he used to climb, and now he looked down, pretending he never needed it. That's the cruelty of raising someone who confuses care with control. I remembered his mother too, how she always said, "He'll change when he grows up." She believed that love would teach him gratitude. But when she died, I think the softness in him died too. He became colder, sharper, more ambitious. He wanted to be powerful, respected, untouchable. And I was just a reminder of the man he thought was weak. There was one night that kept replaying in my head, the night he came home drunk after losing his first job. He cried in my arms like a child again, and I told him I was proud of him no matter what. That was the last time I saw humility in his eyes. Success stole it from him. After that, he didn't want advice. He wanted admiration. He didn't want a father. He wanted a witness. Now, thinking back, I realized I had been preparing him for the world, but I had failed to prepare him for love. I never taught him that respect matters more than success. Maybe I thought he would learn it from watching me. But he never looked long enough. That was my mistake. As I sat in that chair, my chest heavy with regret, one memory stood above the rest, his 10th birthday. He hugged me tight and said, "Dad, you're my hero." I didn't know that years later, that same mouth would tell me, "Stay out of my life." The same voice that once carried pride, now carried rejection. That night, I realized that memories don't fade. They rot. They turn sweet moments into poison when love disappears. Every happy flash from the past became a reminder of what I lost. I could almost hear his younger self asking me, "Why are you sad, Dad?" And I wanted to answer, "Because you grew up." Still, even through the pain, there was one clear truth. I had given him everything he needed to succeed, but I had also given him access to everything he would someday lose. Every paper, every account, every privilege, all because I trusted him more than he deserved. He may have told me to stay out of his life, but his life was still tied to mine in ways he didn't understand. That's when the idea began to form in my mind. Not out of anger, but out of balance. He wanted distance, and I would give it to him. But first, I would show him the value of what he took for granted. Not through words, not through punishment, but through absence. The kind that leaves a permanent silence in the spaces money can't fill. The humiliation didn't come from strangers. It came from silence. The kind that fills a room after someone says something cruel and everyone pretends it's normal. After he told me to stay out of his life, he stood up from the table and laughed with his friends like I wasn't even there. I heard my own blood in my ears. My hands shook, but I didn't let them see it. Pride is the only armor an old man has left. I looked at the faces around us, people I'd helped, fed, even sheltered, and not one of them said a word. They just watched, as if I had deserved it. That was the moment I realized I had raised a man without empathy. He called me old, outdated, and said I should let him handle everything now. He didn't say it kindly. He said it like a punishment. I remembered when he was small and used to wait for me at the gate every evening, running into my arms. Now he couldn't wait for me to leave the room. It was a strange feeling, to watch your own child treat you like a stranger in your own home. I felt smaller than I had in years. I didn't even recognize the person in front of me. That night, he posted a video online, a clip of the argument. Just a few seconds, but enough to make me the fool in everyone's eyes. "Some old people never learn when to stop," the caption said. His friends commented laughing emojis, others agreed, calling me controlling or bitter. I saw it because I still followed him online. I shouldn't have. But I did. And I sat there watching the views go up, the laughter spreading, and I realized how alone I really was. I didn't leave the house for 3 days. The neighbors stopped saying hello. The local storekeeper who always gave me a smile now just nodded politely. They had seen the clip. Everyone had. I had become a story. A sad one. I didn't know if I was more angry at my son or at myself for giving him the power to humiliate me so easily. He didn't apologize. He didn't even mention it. He went on with his life as if nothing had happened, while I stayed inside my house, surrounded by memories that used to mean something. I walked through the rooms he grew up in, his old toys still in boxes, his school certificates on the wall, the marks on the doorframe where I used to measure his height every year. All those little things that once brought me joy now made me sick, because they reminded me of a boy who no longer existed. I sat in the dark for hours, thinking about what I could have done differently. Maybe I was too soft. Maybe I forgave too easily. Maybe I made life too simple for him. He never knew what it was like to be truly hungry, to fear losing everything, to build something from nothing. He thought everything came easy because I never let him see how hard I worked. That was my biggest mistake, hiding my struggles so he could live comfortably. I raised him to believe the world would always bend for him, and now I was the one paying for it. But there was one thing he didn't understand. I may have been humiliated, but I was not powerless. The name he mocked still held weight. The man he dismissed still held keys, to accounts, to property, to his comfort. He thought I was an old fool, but age teaches you one thing. Silence is stronger than noise. While he laughed, I planned. While he bragged, I remembered every document, every signature that still connected his life to mine. I realized something cruel that night. Sometimes love blinds you more than hate. I had loved him so much that I forgot to protect myself from him. But now, that love was gone. In its place stood a cold, steady resolve. He had shown me what he thought of me. Now it was time to show him what I really was. The night after the humiliation, I sat in my chair by the window and didn't move for hours. The city lights outside flickered like small reminders that life goes on, even when yours feels paused. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger fades fast. What remains is something colder. Understanding. I finally understood that love without respect is just weakness in disguise. And I had been weak for far too long. The house was silent except for the ticking clock. Every sound felt louder. The pipes, the wind, even my own breathing. I thought about all the years I had swallowed disrespect, excused arrogance, and told myself he'd grow out of it. But he didn't grow. He just learned how far he could go before I broke. And that night, I realized he'd crossed the last line. There would be no shouting match, no second chance, no lecture about family. Just action. I walked to my study, opened the old wooden drawer, and pulled out a small metal box. Inside were documents, property deeds, account access codes, business agreements, all things I once planned to hand him someday. I had written his name beside mine on many of them because I believed trust was forever. Now, I looked at those papers like they were the weapons I had unknowingly given my enemy. I ran my hand over one of the envelopes and smiled bitterly. Every asset, every account, every signature carried my blood, my work, my pain. Not his. He thought everything belonged to him already, that I was just a name on paper. He was wrong. He forgot that, until I said otherwise, I still owned everything he lived on. And that night, I decided he was going to learn that lesson the hardest way possible. I didn't make the choice out of revenge. I made it out of clarity. He had told me to stay out of his life, so I would, completely. But I wouldn't leave quietly. I would make sure that when I was gone, he'd feel the weight of every careless word, every insult, every forgotten thank you. He would wake up one day and realize that everything he depended on had disappeared, just like his father did. I started making a list, Banks, contacts, lawyers. I hadn't used my connections in years, but they never went away. People still respected my name, even if my son didn't. That was the difference between him and me. I built relationships, he built ego, and ego doesn't last when the money stops. As I wrote, I felt something unexpected: peace. It was like setting down a heavy load I had been carrying for decades. Every stroke of my pen erased another piece of pain. I wasn't just cutting him off, I was freeing myself. I didn't owe him anything anymore. Not love, not explanation, not forgiveness. I had given him everything a father could give. What he did with it was his mistake, not mine. The next morning, I dressed neatly, shaved, and made a pot of coffee. The smell filled the house like it used to when his mother was alive. She would have told me to forgive him, but she never saw what he became. She didn't live long enough to hear her own child call her husband useless. I looked at her photo on the shelf and whispered, "I'm sorry, but it ends today." I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. My voice didn't shake this time. "It's time to make some changes," I said simply. He didn't ask why. He knew my tone. I gave him instructions. Quiet, final, precise. By the time the sun set that day, the process had begun. When I hung up, I sat back and closed my eyes. There was no satisfaction, no triumph, just silence. But it was the kind of silence that brings freedom. He had told me to stay out of his life. I smiled faintly and thought, "I will, son, but I'll take the life I gave you with me." Leverage is not about power. It's about memory. It's about knowing where every string is tied and who holds the other end. My son forgot that I was the one who built the strings he now pulled. He walked through life like everything around him appeared by magic. But I remembered every loan, every transfer, every contract that carried my signature. He might have been the face of success, but I was the backbone. And now, I was going to remove that backbone and watch how fast he collapsed. I opened the old cabinet where I kept the files no one ever asked about. Layers of paper, faded ink, yet every sheet still mattered. Deeds, shares, savings, company accounts, all tied to my name or my authorization. His house, his car, even his business loans were linked through my guarantees. He never noticed because he never bothered to read the fine print. He signed where I told him to. He thought I was doing him a favor. In a way, I was. But not the way he imagined. Every arrogant son forgets that their father's wisdom is written in silence. I never argued when he called me useless. I let him talk because I was recording. Not his words, but his mistakes. The late payments I covered, the investors I convinced, the favors I called in, all done under my name. That was the real leverage. He had success because I built the ground under his feet, and now that ground was mine to take back. I sat at the table, sorting each document one by one, checking the dates, signatures, balances. My name was everywhere. It was strange. For years I thought that would make me proud, but now it only made me tired. Still, I knew what I had to do. It wasn't revenge, it was closure. He told me to stay out of his life, so I would take everything connected to me out of his life too. He would have his independence, stripped and raw. The next day, I called an old friend from the bank, a man who owed me more than a favor. I told him I wanted to move all accounts under private management, liquidate some shares, and freeze joint permissions. He didn't ask questions. In his voice, I could still hear the respect my son no longer had. Within hours, the process began. Quietly, legally, and completely. I didn't need lawyers or threats, just my name. That was enough. By the time the sun set, I had secured everything. My son's company credit lines were frozen for verification, his mortgage restructured, his investments reclassified under pending review. Nothing illegal, just precise steps that turned convenience into chaos. He wouldn't even know until his next transaction failed. That night, I slept for the first time in weeks. No nightmares, no guilt, just stillness. I woke up early, made tea, and watched the dawn light through the window. The world looked cleaner when you stopped expecting kindness from ungrateful people. I wasn't sad anymore. I was free. I had finally acted like the man I used to be. decisive, capable, respected. I realized something while I sipped that tea. My leverage wasn't money or ownership. It was memory. I remembered every lie he told, every favor he took, every moment I stayed silent to protect him. That silence was my investment, and now it was paying back in full. He thought, "Stay out of my life," was a victory. He had no idea it was a warning I had already followed before he said it. The paperwork was done, the strings were cut, and for the first time, he would have to live without my shadow. No support, no safety net, no name to fall back on. Only himself, and the cold truth of what he'd lost. When you strip away everything given by love, you finally see what a man truly is. And deep down, I already knew, without me, he was nothing but noise. The call was short, cold, final. I didn't even plan it for long. It just happened naturally, like something that had been waiting inside me for years. The morning was quiet. The sky was gray. I sat with the phone in my hand for several minutes before dialing. I knew exactly who to call. I still had contacts in the bank. Old friends who remembered the man I used to be. The man my son never bothered to understand. I took a deep breath and pressed the number. When the voice on the other end picked up, I spoke slowly, carefully, like someone who already knew what the answer would be. I gave my name, the account numbers, and the verification details. The manager recognized me immediately. "Of course, sir," he said. There was respect in his tone, something I hadn't heard in my own home for years. That alone almost made me laugh. I didn't explain much. I didn't need to. I just told him I wanted to close all joint accounts, transfer holdings, and restrict authorizations. It took less than 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes to undo 30 years of dependence. When I hung up, I sat there staring at the wall. My hands were still. My heart didn't race. I didn't feel guilty. Just empty. A clean kind of empty. The kind that follows after doing something necessary. For years, I thought that being a father meant enduring. Now I realize that sometimes it means ending. Ending the cycle of disrespect. Ending the habit of forgiveness that turns a man into a fool. Later that afternoon, I made one more call. Not to the bank this time, but to my attorney. I wanted everything formalized. No confusion, no loopholes, no chance for him to twist my silence into guilt. We talked for an hour as I reviewed documents, updating every clause and name. By the end, my assets were consolidated, my will adjusted, and my departure planned. The lawyer asked if I was sure. I told him I had never been more certain in my life. When I put the phone down, I could almost hear the clock ticking louder. Somewhere in another part of the city, my son was probably laughing, drinking, living like nothing could touch him. He had no idea that with a few quiet words, I had just pulled the rug from under his world. Every account he accessed, every loan he depended on, every investment tied to my name, all frozen. Legally, calmly, perfectly. I thought about calling him. Just once. Maybe to warn him. Maybe to say goodbye. But then I remembered his voice that night. "Stay out of my life." He said it like a door slamming in my face. So I decided to let it stay closed. He wanted distance. I was giving it to him. All of it. The next day, I woke up before dawn. The air was crisp, the streets empty. I made a cup of coffee and stood by the window watching the first light hit the horizon. It felt like the start of something. Not freedom, but peace. I realized I didn't need to see the fallout. I didn't want to. My work was done. Whatever came next was his lesson to face. Still, I couldn't stop imagining his face when he'd discover it. The panic, the calls, the confusion. He would reach for his phone, try to contact me, and find nothing. No answer, no trace. Maybe that silence would finally speak louder than any lecture I could give. Maybe that would be the only thing that could reach him now. When I stepped outside that morning, the world looked different. Not brighter, just honest. For the first time in years, I wasn't living for someone else's comfort. I wasn't waiting to be respected. I had taken control back, not through anger, but through calm precision. And as I locked the door behind me, I whispered to myself, "You wanted me out of your life, son. You got it." By evening, the results started to show, quietly at first, like cracks forming beneath the surface of a wall before it collapses. His son's world began to bend, not break all at once. That's the thing about power. When you remove it carefully, the silence hurts more than the noise. It began with a declined transaction at his favorite restaurant, then another at a gas station. Small things that made him check his phone, frown, and refresh the app again and again. He thought it was a glitch. It wasn't. By noon the next day, panic had replaced his confidence. His cards stopped working entirely. The business account showed restricted access. He called the bank, and they confirmed everything was under review by the primary account holder. That was me. His voice must have cracked when he heard it, but I'll never know. I didn't take the call. I didn't need to. I had made sure every step was sealed legally, every change irreversible. He could scream all he wanted, but it wouldn't open a single door. His friends started to drift away almost immediately. When money dries up, loyalty goes with it. The same people who laughed with him at dinners now avoided his calls. He tried borrowing, but word spreads fast. "His accounts are frozen," they whispered. "Something's wrong." He began losing his grip not only on his finances, but on his pride. That's the price of building a life on someone else's name. Once that name withdraws, everything else collapses. Meanwhile, I stayed quiet. I didn't check the news, didn't look at social media. I didn't want to see his face or his pleas. I wanted distance. My phone buzzed constantly with unknown numbers, probably him or the bank or people trying to fix his mess. I turned it off. Silence became my new wealth. Each minute that passed reminded me that I didn't need revenge. All I needed was absence. My absence was doing more damage than any punishment could. A few days later, I received an email from my lawyer confirming that all transfers were complete. The funds were secure, moved beyond his reach. The remaining assets were locked behind private trusts he couldn't touch. $2 million in total. The same money I once thought would guarantee his future now became the wall between us. The world would call it cruel. I called it balance. He told me to stay out of his life, and I simply took my life, and everything I built, with me. I heard through a mutual contact that he tried showing up at my old home. The neighbors said he looked lost, desperate, like someone waking from a dream and realizing he had slept through everything that mattered. He stood at the gate for hours. Nobody opened it. Because I wasn't there anymore. My chair by the window was empty. My study was locked. My phone disconnected. The man who once had everything was now learning what "stay out" truly meant. There was one more thing I arranged before leaving: the donation. Half the funds went to a foundation I started quietly in my wife's memory, a place that actually helped children with no fathers. It felt fitting. I couldn't save my own son's heart, but maybe I could save someone else's. The rest I kept for myself, not to spend, but to live simply, peacefully, far from the noise and betrayal. The night after everything was finalized, I sat in a small rented room near the coast. The air smelled like salt and rain. I didn't feel rich, and I didn't feel poor. I just felt clean, like I had washed off decades of disappointment. I didn't hate my son. I just stopped carrying the weight of his choices. Some people only learn when everything is taken from them. I had been giving my whole life. That night, I finally took something back, myself. It didn't take long before he found me. Pride dies fast when comfort disappears. I was sitting in the small cafe near the coast, the same one I visited every morning, when I saw him through the window. He looked nothing like the man who once mocked me. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes sunken, his hair a mess. He hesitated before walking in, probably unsure if I'd even speak to him. I didn't move. I just watched him the way you'd watch a stranger, not with anger, but with distance. He sat across from me, breathing heavily, like he'd run the whole way there. For a moment, neither of us said a word. I could see the shame in his eyes, the same eyes that once looked down on me. He finally spoke, voice trembling, asking why I did it, why I took everything, why I left him with nothing. I listened in silence, sipping my coffee. Then I reminded him. He told me to stay out of his life. I did exactly what he asked. The money, the accounts, the business. They were parts of me. So I took myself out of his life completely. He started to cry. I'd seen my son angry, arrogant, even cruel, but never like this. This was brokenness. He said he lost everything overnight. His job was gone. His girlfriend left. His friends stopped answering his calls. He had sold his car to pay off his credit card. He said he couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. The world that once praised him now ignored him. He asked if I could fix it. One call, one signature, one favor, just like I always did. I looked at him, my son, a grown man, begging like a boy again. But I saw the truth now. He never respected me because he never feared losing me. Love without respect is weakness. I told him calmly that this wasn't punishment, it was correction. He thought I was old, useless, irrelevant. Yet with one phone call, I showed him the power of everything he'd taken for granted. That silence after I finished speaking. It was heavy, like the air before a storm. He lowered his head, tears dripping onto the table. I wanted to reach out to tell him it was okay. But it wasn't. For the first time, I wanted him to feel every ounce of what I felt that night. He said, "Stay out of my life." That cold rejection, that emptiness that eats through a man's chest until he feels like nothing. He needed to meet that feeling, not from words, but from reality. When he finally spoke again, it wasn't to argue. He apologized, over and over. Said he didn't mean it, that he was drunk, that he was stressed. But apologies lose weight when they come after consequences. I told him forgiveness wasn't something I could just give. It had to be earned. I wanted him to rebuild from the ground up, like I once did, alone, without help, without my name. Only then would he understand the value of respect. He begged for another chance, said he would change, said he'd do anything. But I could tell the words were driven more by fear than remorse. People don't transform overnight, they panic. I finished my coffee, stood up, and placed some money on the table. "You have my blood," I said quietly, "but that doesn't make you my equal. Learn what it means to be a man first." Then I walked out. Outside, the sea wind hit my face. It felt clean, sharp, alive. Behind me, he stayed sitting there, motionless, probably realizing that I wasn't coming back. It was the same realization I had that night at dinner, when he said those words to me. Life has a way of completing its own circles. I didn't destroy him. I just let truth do what time couldn't. And as I walked away from that cafe, I knew one thing. Sometimes love must disappear to teach its value. The days after that meeting were strangely quiet. He didn't call again, not once. Maybe out of pride, maybe out of shame. I didn't expect him to. Pride was his inheritance from me, but without the discipline to carry it right. I stayed by the coast, living simply, listening to the waves hit the rocks every morning. The noise of the world, business, family, gossip, all of it faded into background static. For the first time in decades, I wasn't waiting for anyone to need me. I wasn't waiting for anyone's respect. The silence was heavy, but it was honest. Then the messages started arriving, not from him, but from others. Old colleagues, distant relatives, even strangers. They told me about him, how his reputation had fallen apart, how his arrogance turned to desperation. He had burned bridges at work, insulted the wrong people, lived too fast and too proud. When the money disappeared, so did everyone else. The same people who laughed at his jokes now crossed the street when they saw him coming. I read each message slowly, without joy. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was grief, cold and quiet. Watching your own child crumble is not victory. It's punishment for both sides. I heard he sold the car first, then the watch, then the house I'd helped him buy. He moved into a small apartment, started working odd jobs, the kind of labor he once mocked. People whispered that he'd changed, that he'd become quiet, humble. But I didn't believe in rumors anymore. I needed proof, not words. The same way he needed to prove that respect wasn't just something you demanded, but something you built with your actions. One night, months later, I walked into town for groceries and saw him from across the street. He was standing outside a store, looking through the glass at something he couldn't afford. He looked older, tired, smaller somehow. For a moment, I thought of walking up to him, putting a hand on his shoulder saying, "Come home." But then I remembered. There was no home left to return to, not the one we had. That home died the night he told me to stay out of his life. You can rebuild walls, not hearts. I turned away and kept walking. My groceries felt heavier than usual. Every step back to my small room reminded me of how love, when crushed by pride, turns into something unrecognizable. I still loved him. That's the cruel part. But love doesn't mean going back. Sometimes the most painful act of love is staying gone. A few weeks later, he finally reached out, through a letter. It was short, shaky handwriting. He wrote that he understood now, that he was sorry, that he'd been blind. He said he missed me. He didn't ask for money, didn't ask for forgiveness, just wrote, "I wish I had one more dinner with you." I sat with that letter for hours. The paper smelled like regret. I didn't cry, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I didn't reply. Not because I hated him, but because some lessons should stay carved in silence. I wanted him to live, to rebuild, to find meaning in something deeper than money or power. Maybe one day he'd thank me for walking away. Maybe he wouldn't. Either way, the chapter was closed. Now, when people ask if I have children, I say yes, but I leave it at that. I don't tell them the story. I just smile and change the subject. I still send anonymous donations to his neighborhood's community center. He'll never know it's me. Maybe that's better. Maybe kindness means more when it doesn't need recognition. Sometimes, late at night, I sit on my porch watching the waves and whisper, "You told me to stay out of your life, and I did. But not out of love." The wind carries the words away. I hope somewhere, somehow, he hears them, and finally understands that the man he pushed away never stopped caring, even when he was gone. It has been years now since that last letter. I live in a quiet town far from where everything began. Nobody here knows my name, my story, or what I once had. I like it that way. Every morning I walk to the pier with a cup of coffee and watch the boats leave. The sea doesn't judge or remember. It just moves on, like time itself. Sometimes I wonder if he ever truly understood why I left. Not for revenge, but for peace. People think anger makes you leave. It's not anger. It's exhaustion. It's knowing that love has limits when respect is gone. I built a small life here. A modest apartment, a few books, a small garden outside the window. I don't own much, but everything I have is mine. Not borrowed, not begged for, not taken by someone who thought I owed them my soul. The air feels different when no one controls your name. I don't have luxury, but I have freedom, and at my age, freedom is wealth. I still think of him, though. Not every day, but often enough. I imagine him walking to work, carrying his briefcase, trying to start over. I hope he did. I hope he learned to treat people with the respect he never gave me. Maybe he helps someone now. Maybe he listens before speaking. I'd like to believe that, because if all of this pain didn't change him, then it was all for nothing, and I can't accept that. Sometimes I walk past families at the cafe, fathers and sons laughing together, sharing stories, arguing playfully. It hurts, but not in a sharp way anymore. More like an echo. I see what we could have been, what pride destroyed. I don't blame him fully. The world raises children to chase power, not gratitude. I gave him everything except the one thing he needed most: boundaries. I gave him a life so easy that he forgot what effort feels like. That was my mistake. On quiet nights, when the wind is soft and the waves calm, I take out a small box. Inside it are 3 things: a photo of him as a boy, a copy of the letter I left, and the keys to the house I'll never see again. I don't know why I kept them. Maybe some part of me still hopes that one day he'll find me, not to apologize, but just to sit beside me, as a man to another man, with no anger, no ego. Just silence and understanding. Maybe that's enough. I haven't told anyone the full story. Not the neighbors, not the people who wave at me every morning. They think I'm just an old man who moved here for peace after retirement. And maybe that's true in a way. The past doesn't matter much when you stop letting it control you. But sometimes, when I lie awake at night, I still hear his voice. That young, cold version of him saying, "Stay out of my life." And then I hear my own voice, steady and calm, answering back, "I did." The money, the business, the house, none of it matters now. What matters is that I learned something late in life. Love without respect becomes slavery. I was a slave to my hope that he would change. The moment I let that hope go, I became free again. People think cutting ties is cruel, but sometimes it's the kindest thing you can do, for both sides. It forces growth, or it leaves a void that reminds you to do better next time. If I could speak to him now, I'd tell him this: "Son, I never wanted to hurt you. I just wanted you to understand what you were throwing away. I didn't take your life from you. I gave it back to you without my name attached." Then I'd smile, not in anger, but in peace. Because even though he may never come back, I know I did what was right. And when the sun sets over the water and the horizon burns gold, I whisper a small prayer for him. Not for forgiveness, not for reunion, just for understanding. Because in the end, I didn't disappear out of hate. I disappeared out of love that had nowhere else to go.